Continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by In the Know with Wealth Management Group, hosted by Craig Bolanos. Heard Sunday mornings at 10.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. This was fortuitous timing. With the release of the Project Veritas whistleblower and undercover investigative work on Google, on Wednesday, you had the House Homeland Security Committee have a little back and forth with some of the cultural Marxist minders from Facebook and Google and Twitter, testifying about how social media companies handle terror-related content as well as misinformation and hate speech. And Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw got into the exchange about the lines that are drawn. You know, sure, of course, culling terrorist videos and terrorist propaganda is one thing, but you get down the slippery slope pretty quickly, it seems, at these institutions, these businesses. You know, you slide down to where you're calling people like Dennis Prager a Nazi and banning Prager University videos. And this is what has people a bit exercised, as Dan Crenshaw explained.
It goes down the slippery slope of what speech is appropriate for your platform and the vague standards that you employ in order to decide what is appropriate. And this is especially concerning given the recent news and the recent leaked emails from Google. They show that labeling mainstream conservative media as Nazis is a premise upon which you operate. It's not even a question, according to those emails. The emails say, given that Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, and Dennis Prager are Nazis, given that that's a premise, what do we do about it? 2 of 3 of these people are Jewish, very religious Jews, and yet you think they're Nazis. It begs the question, what kind of education do people at Google have? So they think that religious Jews are Nazis? 3 of 3 of these people had family members killed in the Holocaust. Ben Shapiro is the #1 target of the alt-right, and yet you people operate off the premise that he's a Nazi. It's pretty disturbing. And it gets to the question, do you believe in hate speech? How do you define that? Can you give me a quick definition right now? Is it written down somewhere, Google? Can you give me a definition of hate speech?
Congressman, yes. So hate speech, again, as updated in our guidelines now, extends to superiority over protected groups to justify discrimination, violence, and so on, based on a number of defining characteristics, whether that's race, sexual orientation, veteran status.
Do you have an example of Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson or Dennis Prager engaging in hate speech? Do you have one example off the top of your head?
So, Congressman, we evaluate individual piece of content based on that content rather than based on the speaker.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. All right. Hate speech is speech we don't like, Congressman. That's how we define it. Donald Trump was on with Maria Bartiromo yesterday, and she took up the question about Google as well in light of the revelations through Project Veritas that Dan Crenshaw was talking about at that House hearing. Here's what President Trump had to say.
It's amazing that I won the election because you saw what happened yesterday with Google.
Yep.
Google was totally biased to they talk about Russia because they had some bloggers. Let me tell you, they're trying to rig the election. That's what we should be looking at, not the witch hunt, the phony witch hunt, which has proven zero. Not even a phone call. This is the greatest political disgrace in history. And you know it. I don't have to talk to you about it. You know it. They should be sued because what's happening with the bias, and now you see it with that executive yesterday from Google, the hatred for the Republicans.
Right.
It's not even like, gee, let's lean Democrat.
No, I mean, as the whistleblower, as it were, the anonymous whistleblower, as well as some of the undercover work, clearly seem to indicate Google's priority changed after 2016 such that we have to prevent Trump from being reelected. We have to be not in the business of a platform to allow for interaction and speech and information accessing and sharing. We have to be in the politics business to make sure that our values are represented in electoral outcomes. And so that's what they've mobilized to do. And now the question is, what do people want to do about that on the left and the right, as this was a topic in last night's debate with the 10 Democrats, the first 10 Democrats, because they don't like the concentration of corporate power. So these big tech companies are perhaps creating the perfect storm of political bipartisanship that will not work out particularly well for them. For more on the topic of big tech and a couple of other topics as well that she's done some good investigative work on, as per usual, we're pleased to be joined by Sharyl Attkisson, investigative journalist, Emmy Award-winning host of Full Measure. Sharyl, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You've had an experience with another big tech outfit that doesn't get the same sort of notoriety as Twitter or Facebook or Google, Wikipedia, and how Wikipedia has been weaponized. You've written about it recently. What's happened to essentially your biography on Wikipedia?
Well, let me just say I've written about this in my books. I've spoken about this in my TEDx talks for some years. And my biography is unimportant, but it's except to the extent that it explains what's going on the rest of the platform, whereby agenda editors, as I call them, these are anonymous Wikipedia editors, some of them paid by PR firms, some of them ideologues on a mission, have gotten a great deal of control the way the Wikipedia volunteer editing system works, and they control topics and pages to make sure that one cannot post or see or read certain facts. Even if these are footnoted, published, peer-reviewed studies, for example, they'll erase them. They make sure that something reads a certain way. In my case, and on many biographies, there are attempts by Media Matters interests and pharmaceutical industry interests to make sure I look controversial on things that are not controversial, but they want people who look at reporting on certain topics to believe that these things are settled or that I was on the wrong side somehow. So they selectively take false information and make sure it stays there. Sometimes it's pretty cagey. It's what you don't see. It's what they make sure is edited out. And these all violate their policies, Wikipedia's own policies on neutrality and fairness and so on. But these editors allow themselves to do so. And if you try to change it, which the person who is part of the biography cannot change it, but if a well-meaning editor has the information and tries to correct an inaccuracy, they just delete it because they're more powerful the way the system works. And this is happening on all kinds of topics and with all kinds of people across Wikipedia.
So even if they were talking about you and it's your Wikipedia page and you notice that they got something wrong, they won't listen to you if you send them an email or try and call them?
Yes. You're not considered a valid source on yourself. There was an author named Philip Roth. I told his story in a TEDx talk that they claimed that the inspiration for a character in one of his novels was one thing. And when he tried to correct it and said, well, that wasn't the inspiration for a character in my novel, here's what it was, they said, I'm sorry, you can't affect your own biography and you're not a valid source on yourself. And with me, just for low-hanging fruit, not the bias, I just pointed out that they had my birth date and my birthplace wrong and things like that. They won't change it. And they started saying things. They have little talk pages where they discuss it. They're just crazy if you just get into this. It's very arcane but interesting. And when I told them that they had the wrong birth date and birthplace and so on, they started talking about me and saying things like, why would she deny where she was born? Like they believe the false information that's been put out there mistakenly by some stranger who doesn't know me, and they will not let you. For example, I offered to send a birth certificate privately to the editors so they could see where I was born, and they won't take it.
Right, where were you born?
It's just the craziest system. I was born in St. Petersburg. Who cares? Florida, not Sarasota, where they had, my birthday. It doesn't matter, except it's an encyclopedic resource, so you'd think they would want it to be accurate. Right. But that was my way of pointing out how much is wrong and broken with Wikipedia. So bad that the co-founder, Larry Sanger, he separated some years ago because of all this. He says it's really inmates running an asylum now, and he's starting a new project. But it's really just, I think, gotten out of control. Doesn't mean, of course, you can't find interesting information and some correct information on Wikipedia. Of course, it's there. But the pages that these special interests wish to control, you don't necessarily know if you're looking at one, can often be completely skewed and with a lot of false and misleading information on it.
Yeah, and you suggest not only do they ignore opportunities to correct the record, they go after people who would continue to press the issue of correcting the record.
This is what shocked me when I did a story on this for Full Measure. You can Google the dark side of Wikipedia and find that story. They literally, these crazy editors, will go after somebody who tries to correct something or fix something if they keep pursuing it when they've been told to stand down. They found out in one case where a guy works. They researched him. They called his office and got him in trouble by telling his bosses that he was editing Wikipedia on company time. The guy got fired, by the way.
What?
He says he was editing on his lunch hour. They tracked another guy down, and they were talking about it in some documents that were released that they didn't like. And they found out they can look at your IP addresses, and they start putting information together. They can figure out personal details about you. They found out that he had traveled home to Florida for Christmas and was trying to edit Wikipedia from his parents' address. They were all discussing where he was for Thanksgiving. I mean, really crazy stuff that include privacy violations among these other problems of bias that I'm talking about.
You know, it's interesting, too, in light of the Google matter and what you just heard Dan Crenshaw talking about in that House committee hearing. You know, Ben Shapiro, Dennis Prager, Jordan Peterson, these are Nazis. That's not a point of discussion. That's just statement of fact. And then now, how do we treat these Nazis? This is in Google's internal communications. These are the same people that bristle when President Trump calls the D.C. press corps or particular D.C. press corps outlets or reporters enemies of the state. But it's very fine for these big tech companies to treat people and essentially categorize them online as enemies of the people. I mean, how else would you describe those sorts of characterizations of the likes of a Dennis Prager or a Ben Shapiro?
Well, this is a problem, I think, with having third parties be arbiters of things, subjective things like hate speech. Sometimes it's very clear what hate speech is. Sometimes, as we see, that's in the eye of the beholder. All of it is protected under our Constitution, except to the extent it breaks the law and sparks violence. And I really think all the companies would be better off just saying, not our thing. You have ways to filter what you view and what you see. It's not our thing to filter it, and except to the extent it may be illegal, of course. And that lets everybody off the hook, kind of like you manage what you see on your own profiles, and you get rid of the objectionable stuff. Now we're in the position of government spurring these companies to make decisions that politicians want made as to what's objectionable and what they don't want to see. This all, I think, started around 2015 during the campaign by a group called First Draft. It's actually a nonprofit that started this whole fake news, we've got to get rid of and curate information for people, which no one was asking for at the time. They created a market for it. And First Draft, as I researched, Follow the Money, was started by Google, whose parent company is Alphabet, whose CEO at the time was the number one donor to Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. So I think these are all politically motivated things, plus they're being pressed by certain politicians to make decisions or else we'll regulate you. And all of this is tied up in a way that I think is really dangerous to free speech and the free internet. And I will tell you one more thing your listeners can Google if they wish. Larry Sanger, the former co-founder of Wikipedia, is promoting something called the Declaration of Digital Independence, which addresses all of this. And he wants people to sign a petition to say, look, we have a right to independence online and not have several big corporations controlling social media and everything we see in this way. He's got sort of a high-tech answer that he thinks we ought to be moving towards so this doesn't happen.
Very interesting. I'm glad you raised the issue of what Larry Sanders is doing and that digital declaration of independence. Maybe there will be some movement in that direction because of the interesting cross-section of people that are very unhappy with big tech, whether it's over privacy issues or content-related issues, as we were discussing. She is Sharyl Attkisson. She's an investigative journalist, Emmy Award-winning host of Full Measure. Her most recent piece, one of her most recent pieces, which I'll tweet out, is The Weaponization